Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program this evening. Uh, it promises to be an exciting time as well. Lots happening all over the world, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and we're going to touch on quite a lot of points. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the program this evening.
Thank you very much. I'm always honored to be on your program, and I look forward to the interaction with our members who have become almost regular members of a family. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Prof. Um, So we're going to start with Europe, and I think last week when we were talking about Germany, we were talking about a Germany post Angela Merkel, but we've been hit by this issue where there's only been a narrow victory. One, my question, sir, did you foresee that we would still have Angela Merkel in control, even though in the caretaker capacity? And then, secondly, sir, there is a point you raised when we were discussing the US, and that was the time frame between inauguration, between the elections and inauguration, and what could potentially happen in that window. Now in Germany, we face Angela Merkel being in position, not being able to pass any laws. What are your views on this, sir?
Well, thank you very much. It gives us an opportunity to make a distinction between the US system, which was a constitutional provision, that gap between election and being sworn in, taking office. In Europe, presumably it depends on how long it takes you to form a coalition if there is not an outright uh, victor. Um, for example, in Great Britain, usually by the morning after, you know who is going to be the prime minister. But it's because the margin of victory for one party is so wide that even if all the other parties in parliament are coalesce, they still wouldn't have enough members to overrun the victory of the winning party. Now, in the case of Germany, it's the same thing. Let us assume, for the purpose of this discussion, that the CDU stroke CSU, which is the Angela Merkel party, says had won the majority seats in parliament, then we wouldn't be talking about the need for an interim chancellor. Uh, we, by today, we will have known who will be the chancellor, and probably the parliament, the Bundestag, will be up and running. The same thing in France. So really, in Europe, there are no constitutional provisions. It's really a question of the consequences of uh, a narrow electoral victory. Having said that, let me say I'm not too comfortable with a plethora of political parties, each winning only 25% of the electors. Because if you win 25% of the electors, it means 75% are opposed to you. Then you move on to another party and it's won 26%. Then you move on to another party, it's won 18%. You know, it could be a recipe for instability. And at a time when there is a resurgence of right wing fascist parties, I thought what you need in each country is a strong, stable political party forming a government that can push back at the resurgence of these right-wing populist parties. Uh, Sprinklers of political parties, each claiming a little slice of the electoral cake, makes me feel uncomfortable. Let me just put it that way. But if Merkel stays on until December, we know her. It is true. I mean, until a government is formed, parliament cannot function. But she's such a level-headed, seasoned um, head of state who's been at it, and that we don't need to worry. This time, we don't need to worry. But it wouldn't always be that way.
All right, sir. But let me put this question to you, sir. Um, Given what has happened now and the wider role that Angela Merkel played in Europe, does this not weaken whoever comes in now as the new chancellor in terms of their positioning within Europe and what they're able to do?
Um, well, let's not uh, make a statue out of Merkel. I mean, I think for young people, Merkel is the only one they've ever known. But for people of my generation, there have been strong chancellors in, well, first of all, in Western Europe, I mean, in Western Germany, Konrad Adenauer, um, um, there was even the leader of the FDP, who I mean, no, socialist, but he had a commanding personality. So really, we Western Germany had always been lucky to have strong personalities as chancellor. So we don't really need to worry too much that after Merkel, um, we may be in for, a weak Germany, not necessarily. We know, we don't know, we don't have character profiles of the people who are in the running now. But please remember that really we didn't have that much of a profile for Margaret Thatcher when she became prime minister, or Harold Wilson when he became prime minister. or even the last strong Labour Prime Minister, Blair. So, or this young man, Macron, in France, whoever even heard of him, and yet he hasn't proved to be a disaster for France. So, people grow into office. Maybe that's the point I'm trying to make. People do grow into office.
Thank you for that, sir. Um, a few weeks ago, we were talking about the AUKUS deal, and it turned out France was on the losing end of that, at least from what we could see on the outside. Now, France has announced a new agreement with Greece. And I'll quote the Greek Prime Minister. And what they've said here, he's called this agreement a first step towards European defense autonomy. Sir, what do you think that means? Is this another organization separate from NATO that they're referring to here?
No, no, not necessarily. And in this particular case, I don't think so. But I think, number one, this is one of, um, there's a tendency, right, to see this as one of the consequences of the US, Australia, UK submarine deal. But when you know how long it takes to negotiate these deals, I think this French Greek deal had been in the offing for quite a while. It probably would have come on stream even if the Australian deal with France had not gone off the rail. However, both countries, both France and Greece, are now trying to use this to make a point about the need for an independent French military apparatus that will allow the EU itself to take independent positions and not be tied to the apron strings of the United States. However, as we said on this program some time ago, the apron strings of the United States right now is so strong that it cannot be matched by an EU military presence that does not take on board Germany. And the Germans have not indicated that they are prepared to sign on to an EU military status that will be independent of NATO. They haven't indicated any such preparedness. And the reason is simple. Today, there was an announcement from the German judicial system that they were looking for a 90-something-year-old woman who was going to be put on trial for her role during the Second World War in the treatment of Jews. She was only 18 during the Second World War. She was just a secretary at one of the concentration camps, um, and yet they are going to put her on trial. Of course, the prosecutors must have evidence that even as a secretary, she knew what was going on and contributed to the activities at the concentration camp. But the point I'm just trying to make is the Second World War may be past for us. It is still present for the Germans. And I don't and the Germans are quite aware of that. But until Germany signs on to it, I think that it's just work in progress, as we say in this part of the world.
So, to what extent do we consider France as a strategic deal maker when it comes to this sort of military activities? Because last week we talked about them pushing back in Mali, going against the desire of the Malian junta to use Russian mercenaries. We talked about them in Chad, I think it was, some time back as well. Of course, the AUKUS deal. Now this is coming up again. Is France that strategic a deal maker when it comes to this kind of military deals?
No. Again, we've added a few, we've added a few, we've drawn attention also to a few factors, which is that France continues to try to bat above its capability. As I, my favorite phrase is that since Napoleon, France has still seen itself as the leader of Europe since Napoleon. And there are different things that it uses to try to buttress, this pretension on its part. And one of those things had been its control of its former colonies. It gave them nominal independence in the 60s, but it controls every other thing: economy, military, any other thing, the political development programs in their former colonies, whether it is here or in the Pacific islands. So it's what it's trying to do in Chad, in Mali, in Cote d'Ivoire, is to use it has military bases really in all these places. And what it's trying to do is to use the military bases to diplomatically, I will use the phrase, to influence development, in those countries. But as I again said on this program, one of the late heads of state, late presidents in West Africa, once told me that, yes, at that time, the 60s, 70s, 80s, what have you, France will continue to run its programs in former African colonies, because the money she makes from them really is more than the amount of money she spends, if it's any, in keeping its influence in this country. But that a time is going to come when France will find the cost of its presence in its former territories simply unbearable, and will then have to pull out, whether she likes it or not. So what we are seeing probably is that France itself is finding the cost of running that presence beyond, I mean, beyond what it needs to play the big role in Europe. And of course, we've made reference to the colonial tax, which is still forces its former African territories to pay her for for the presence of for being made colonies by France. In addition to the fact that that all these former territories, former colonies, are forced to deposit 75% of their annual the annual income they make from their exports in the central bank in Paris. And if they want to borrow from there, their own money, if they want to borrow from there, they must pay the going bank interest rates. However, France can use those deposits to back up its own currency, to you see, free of any interest charges. So France has been playing this role. It's just that nobody has paid too much attention to it. But now, and frankly, there's no French president who will not continue to aspire to a Napoleonic status, role in the world. None.
Sir, there's a question here that I want to put to you. Now, to the person that has put this question, I hope I'm getting the context in which you've put it. So, if I haven't asked the question right, please clarify in the comment section. But I think what this person is asking is that the lessons of World War II will take about 4 generations to clear out of the minds of people. And would that not be some sort of get out for France in terms of France suffering any repercussions from the impact of World War II? Now, please, I hope I got that point right. If not, please clarify in the questions.
I'm a bit puzzled myself as to the import, because because we were talking about the influence of World War II on Germany and why it is influencing um, um, German aspirations in the European Union, and why it won't stand up to France right now. It was Germany we were talking about, not France. So that's really why I'm a bit puzzled by the import of the of the question.
Okay, what I would say, sir, is I'd ask that particular person, can you please rephrase that question if you still want Prof to respond to it? But there's another question here, sir. I think you've answered it, but I will put it to you anyway. Is the policy of France on its former colonies? I think this person is asking that, is it a correct one? And I will add on to that. How do these colonies get out of, former colonies, I should say, how do they get out of that stranglehold?
They don't. That's the point. They can't, even if they want to. First of all, someone called me on the phone after last week's session and said, "Why are you being so hard on the French?" So let me expand it a little bit. All former colonial authorities had ensured when they were leaving that they granted independence into the hands of malleable and pliable leaders. Those leaders that they felt they couldn't control, they killed off on the eve of independence. They made sure that they did not capture power. They were assassinated. Apart from one or two, coming to my mind is Secretary in Guinea. In other ones, they either ensured that they broke their territories into several mini, independence countries. For example, France had two federations on the eve of independence. But at independence, she broke each of the federation up into smaller countries. The British also did the same thing in East Africa. Probably of all their territories, Nigeria was probably the only one they left as it is. And it's because if Nigeria had been broken up, let us say into three regions as they were then, two of those regions would have been run by leaders that the British could not control, while only the third region will be the one they will be able to control. And so they kept Nigeria together as one, but ensured that control of a united Nigeria was in the hand of Nigerian leaders that they could control. So really, it's not that the leaders like things the way they are, but it's because those who didn't like it, who didn't want, I mean, 6 years or so, no, about 8 years, Nkrumah was in power, they overthrew him. Lumumba in the Congo, I'm not even sure he was in power for up to a year before not only did they engineer his being overthrown, they engineered this assassination by Belgian officers. Not they didn't even trust the Congolese to do the dirty job for them. Belgian officers actually carried out the execution. So to answer your question directly, it's not that they like it, but if you're a leader and you want to survive, you play ball with the former. But a time is going to come. Again, what that old man, wise old man, told me. A time is going to come when either they run into problems in Europe and leave Africa alone, or your development within Africa itself ensured that new leaders come in who will be independent of manipulation by leaders from the former colonial territories.
So there's a question here that I will put to you. This one is from YouTube, and the person is saying, from your perspective, how does Nigeria effectively deal with the French conundrum in West Africa? And the second question is, what manner of engagement collaboration, or containment would you recommend, and why?
Oh boy. Uh, um, uh, we are surrounded by French territories or boundaries, apart from the sea. When, if we probably look into it, we will be surrounded by French speaking fish. But we are surrounded by uh, French speaking territories. And the French have not hidden the fact that a united Nigeria is a threat to their control over their territories, because it, in a way, you may say, it encourages the leaders in those territories to see what a really independent African country can do with itself. And you'll recall that France engineered the support for Biafra during the Nigerian Civil War. Now, to me, there's only one way to actually engage the French syndrome, and that is for Nigeria to get its act together. A successful, powerful Nigeria will simply be too strong for the French to seek to undermine. But as long as we don't get our act together in Nigeria, uh, we are driven by ethno-religious differences and chasms and cleavages. Those cleavages will be played upon by any antagonistic European body, European nation, in order to drive Nigeria towards uh, um, um, towards the cliff edge. So Nigeria must heal these cleavages by running an equitable, fair, and balanced federal nation. Um, you know, after, I mean, Nigeria will be 61 years old tomorrow, actually. And you will think that after 61 years, we will have found out enough about ourselves that we are not our own enemies, but that we have external antagonists, and that therefore we should concentrate on building a powerful nation. Unfortunately, we haven't come to that conclusion.
There's a last question here. This is a direct question here. And still on this Francophone Africa issue, this person is saying, what would you suggest to the United Nations on the neo-colonialism of Francophone African countries by France? In short, why is the UN not doing something about this? Since it's so widespread, everybody knows about it. In a sense, why is France getting away with this?
Hmm. I think that you should read the book by Winston Churchill on how it was impossible to deal with de Gaulle during the Second World War. You should read uh, what General Eisenhower had to, what General Eisenhower wrote about his dealings with General de Gaulle. You would think that it was France that was offering refugee was giving refugee status to the Americans and the British rather than the other way around. If you've ever had to deal with French leaders, French politicians, you will know that they are a difficult, stubborn lot. That's the first question. That's the first point. The second point is the French have veto in the Security Council of the United Nations, which means really that effectively France can block anything the UN wants to do to contain it. Number three, how many of the superpowers in the UN have clean hands when it comes to neocolonialism, comes to exploitation of others? Go and read the book on the Confessions of the Economic Hitman, written by a former CIA agent, about how the CIA has a section that goes around dealing with leaders who do not agree with not just the American government, but also the policies of American companies. That deep state operates not to undermine countries that created them, but to undermine other countries externally. So, in one word, France is not alone in what it does. It may be more devious than the others, but it's not alone. And therefore, who is going to cast the first stone?
Thank you for that, sir. Before I leave France and move on to Turkey, it was announced just before we got on the program this evening that the former French president Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to a year of house arrest after illegally financing his re-election bid. How do you react to that news, sir?
Uh, 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 it saddened me because on this program we had applauded uh, African countries for what happened to Hissène Habré, the former president of Chad, who was jailed in Senegal for crime against humanity and international human rights when he was president of Chad. He's died in that prison now. And we applauded South Africa when they decided to send Zuma, their former president, to prison for infraction of the law. And at that time, I also pointed out that there were double standards involved because no leader in the Western world had actually been sent to prison uh, for any infractions of the law. And now you have an example. Twice, Sarkozy has been found guilty, admittedly of corruption, but I will deal with, with the other part later. Admittedly of corruption. And is he being sent to prison? No. He will be under house arrest. One law for the poor and one law for the rich. That's the message that we are now getting from Europe. And you then ask, why put our leaders in prison in Africa? I could hear I can foresee a questioner coming in to say, well, he was sentenced for corruption. He wasn't sentenced for violation of human rights, international human rights, and so on. Yeah, that is another example of double standards. Has any American leader been tried for what happened in Iraq? I was watching one of the programs in Afghanistan now, where we were being taken on tour of the prisons set up by the American forces to house Afghan, Taliban, Al Qaeda, or just people opposed to the American presence. When you see that prison, and don't let us forget the one in Cuba, you will then wonder, where's anybody talking about respect for human rights? Why do people not talk about African violating, their forces violating human rights and this and that? Why? So the reason why they're only being tried for corruption is because nobody dares put on trial any leader in the Western world for activities in the non-Western world, even though they perpetrate all kinds of crimes there. Nobody will put them on trial. And this is the point that Africans were making, that this International Criminal Court that was set up, they were not complaining about trying African leaders there for gross violation of human rights, but they were saying there were other leaders who also could be put on trial for violation of human rights and who nobody dares touch them. So now you have this example that he's not going to prison, he will serve it at home. To me, that's double standard.
Thank you, Prof. Let's move to Turkey. Now, President Erdogan has raised some concerns that while in New York for the UN General Assembly, he was expecting to talk to President Biden. Unfortunately, that meeting did not materialize. Now, it seems he's then turned to Russia and they've had what they called the Sochi summit. On top of that, he's now gone on to buy more Russian equipment, military equipment. How do you react to this news? Because it appears that Turkey is doing this to spite the U.S.
I think that what motivates the president of Turkey is more fundamental than that. I think he's come to the conclusion that even though he is a member of NATO, he's come to the conclusion that he couldn't entrust the security of Turkey to the moralizing double standards of the United States. There are so many examples we can give, but obviously, I think our listeners are professionals in foreign policy, so they are aware of this. You pay for weapons from the United States. Number one, even when they agree to sell the weapons to you, they will not sell you the latest model. Number two, what they are selling to you, there'll be so many conditions attached. And then number three, in the middle of probably when you need the equipment, one senator, just one senator, can raise an objection and put a block to equipment that you've already bought being supplied to you. I think he came to the conclusion that, well, the role he envisages for Turkey will not be compatible with being dependent on the United States for weapons. And so he turns to Russia, where he will not meet with so many objections. Now, I mean, I can hear NGOs devoted to human rights raising an objection that surely protection of human rights should be regarded as a legitimate factor in determining whether you send, whether you sell weapons to countries. And I will say, with all due respect, international relations is more complex than that. International relations is about power. And if I were head of state, if I were president, I wouldn't make the supply of weapons to my forces dependent, especially on people who moralize on one hand, and yet the behavior of their own troops, which is sanctioned, allowed by the terms of engagement, and enables them to engage in all kinds of in the things that are needed for them to achieve their objectives. So I think this is really what's motivating the president of Turkey in actually switching, because this is the second time he will do it, to become more dependent on supply of weapons from Russia.
Thank you for that analysis, Prof. Let's look at, you talk about power there. Let's look at North Korea and South Korea. The sister of the North Korean leader has suggested in a statement that they may be willing to go back to some sort of inter-Korean dialogue, provided that there is some respect towards them from the South. How do we interpret this gesture? Is this moving things in the right direction for us, or is this just another move by North Korea to show themselves the upper hand in this situation?
Well, First of all, let's congratulate her, the sister. She's just been promoted today to full membership of the inner circle of decision makers in North Korea. Even though we all know, I mean, from when her brother stepped in, that she's actually been deputy leader or co-leader. No, she wouldn't be co-leader, but deputy leader. The brother listens to her a lot. And if one wants to know the direction of politics or policies in North Korea, one should also listen to her. Um, Let me answer your question in the way you didn't put the question. Um, Nobody is going to overrun North Korea. That's number one. Two, there's not going to be unification of North Korea and South Korea. In other words, the Vietnam experiment is not going to happen in Korea. Korean weaponry had got to the stage now where I think they feel more secure. In the past 3 weeks, the weaponry they have displayed shows that they haven't been sleeping all the time they were negotiating with Trump. And every week seems to come up with some new weaponry by North Korea. When they talk about respect for them, they're probably making reference to this annual military exercise between the United States and South Korea. But you will recall that on this program, we actually made reference to one new development in South Korean military strategy. And that was in themselves upgrading their military presence. How far they have also gone, and letting North Korea know that they have not been asleep. One, two, they have not been totally dependent on the United States. So the message that they are prepared to reopen the direct telecommunications between the North and the South, and by that, I don't want to be misunderstood. By that, I mean that the direct communications between the two leaders, not between the two peoples. It's like North Korea saying, "We hear you, we see you. Um, if you are going to demonstrate independence, some measure of independence from American policies towards North Korea, then it's worth us talking to see how far. But there will be red lines. And one of the red lines is not that North Korea is going nowhere. They will now also have to indicate that they accept that South Korea is also not going anywhere. What are going to be the terms now of coexistence?
Uh, Thank you for that, Prof. Someone here on YouTube says North Korea has always been the senior Korea, but for the USA. The respect she's talking about is for South Korea to turn away from the USA. Prof, we're running out of time, but I want to hear your comments on 2 points that have to do with the United Kingdom. Number one, I have my head in my hands. Fuel scarcity in the United Kingdom, Prof, as a result of, well, I don't know. There have been so many theories. What is your take on that, sir?
I, I was wondering whether we went this program without touching base with your fuel scarcity.
Let's hope we don't run out
Uh,
of fuel here.
oh, you have the North Sea, you have the North Sea oil supply. No, your problem in your problem in United Kingdom actually is one of the consequences of Brexit. You don't have enough lorry drivers um, driving oil, I mean, supply of oil tankers. Uh, and it's because uh, most of the oil tankers were citizens of the European Union, allowed to work anywhere. You drove them out after Brexit. And now, this is one of the consequences. You know, you've been lucky. When I say you, I mean the United Kingdom has been lucky that COVID-19 pandemic came at the right time to hide the consequences of Brexit. If you recall, there was starting to be food shortages because, again, food being brought into the United Kingdom from Europe um, was starting to be scarce because of custom regulations where they had to go through, and they hadn't really worked out how you import fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, and yet comply with custom regulations with all the papers you need to fill. And those were starting to become apparent when COVID-19 pandemic came. So that then fell under the radar. You'll also recall your problem with the French over fisheries. Who's entitled to fish where and to sell the fish where? That also was starting to impact on British fishermen when the French said, you cannot bring your fish into our market. And the market was the main market for those fishermen. So, in a way, is Brexit all over the consequence of Brexit that we are facing all over again? And one just wonders what else. I'm not, you see, there's a condescension. Um, you now decide you will issue licenses to EU drivers. Who says the EU drivers want to come, haven't been driven out, and get licenses to work until, I think, December, and then you drive them out again? I don't think any self-respecting uh, 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 oil tanker drivers from Europe will agree to come in under those terms. So, being somebody who lives, day and night in a country with scarcity of petrol, um, I must say that there is what the French call a bit of Schadenfreude, uh, laughing at hmm, uh,
You want to laugh at our calamity. All right. One last point. One last point before we go. Are you a James Bond fan?
Yes, I grew up at that time. Bond, James Bond.
All right.
Yep,
Yes. So are you going to be
yep.
watching? Are you going to be watching No Time to Die?
I will. When I can get access to it, maybe Netflix will put it on. I will. But let me put this. Let me say this, and offend so many people. There has only been one Bond, James Bond, and that is Sean Connery. Any
Ah,
any other James Bond? Nah, no.
okay, Prof. That one would debate
Mm.
offline because Roger Moore, Daniel Craig. Okay, we debate that one offline. Thank you to our viewers for
All
joining
right.
us this evening. Thank you, Prof. It's been a great time and exciting time with you again this evening. We'll see you next week.
Wakanga.
Thank you very much, sir. Bye, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.